talking about BDCP, and that's on my list of things to talk about a little more. Let me talk about where they're at. They have, within the last couple of weeks, released over 10,000 pages of administrative draft material, posted it on the web. Just last night, at about 6 o'clock, I got a formal notification from DWR that they would like us as a responsible agency to review certain sections of that, and they list the sections that they think are ready for review by April the 16th. And we have, in fact, engaged Arcadis, as you'll recall, earlier last year, and we have an updated task order with them, and they are already on the job working to try and help us walk through what an administrative comment letter would be. So we will be bringing back to the council an outline of that probably in 2 weeks. And the process for the EIR is such that their plan now is to release a draft EIR by the end of June and have that out for public comment through the fall, and then to certify one sometime next year. My expectation is they won't be able to release one in June. I think they will. They have committed, however, to have a recommended proposed project by July. So my expectation is that sometime the end of June, beginning part of July, the Secretary of Interior and Governor and key stakeholders will actually be able to step up and say, our proposed project that we will evaluate in the EIR, EIS, is this, and that they then will release a document for review. My expectation is that document's going to be well over the 10,000 pages which they've currently released. Their draft plan is over 5,000 pages. Some of the appendices have not yet been released. So, for example, the Bureau has engaged our science program to bring in a panel to evaluate what's called the effects analysis, which is the technical analysis of the effects of implementation of BDCP on the environment, on something like 60 species. That panel has met and done one review of the first draft effects analysis. They are expecting to meet, I think it's in April, and the goal has been to have a final review on that effects analysis from the science panel by the first part of June. They have not, however, provided all of the information that they were supposed to have provided for the science panel so that they can review everything. For example, there is a 1,500-page appendix on flows, which has not been released. And as I understand it, there are 6 appendices to that effects analysis that haven't been released. So that is likely to delay our final report on the effects analysis. And just the complexity of this means getting this completed on schedule is incredibly difficult. That said, we should be very complimentary of DWR and Resources Agency for actually getting something this complex pulled together and on the street for an administrative review. I would expect that as we complete the Delta Plan, that we will have another big effort in probably this fall to review the draft environmental document for BDCP and make comments, and that will be a prelude to what the council's role will be potentially if there's an appeal later on in the process. So it's...
Thanks, Joe. Joe and I went over to the Independent Science Board last week, I think it was last week, and they were meeting immediately after the release of 10,200 pages and appeared quite horrified with the notion that they had to, in 30 days, read 10,200 pages and respond in precise detail. And perhaps Dr. Goodwin, who's been here 2.5 weeks and therefore is in full, complete charge of all these smart scientists that are out there, could talk a bit about the meeting, their reflections, and what you're thinking about.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think you have to press one of the buttons.
It's on? That's great. Okay. So yeah, the Independent Science Board had an extensive discussion about that last week. And I think their main concern was to really jump in and do the level of review that was required in 30 days is going to be very difficult and complex. So what they're also looking at is trying to take an overview, not just of the document itself, but the many reviews, the effects analysis, and some of the other studies which are currently underway. So the outcome of that meeting was that they had asked that the science program and the lead scientist develop a charge to outline what their review will actually comprise. And I guess perhaps Dr. Norgard will talk more about that tomorrow. So that was the task that was given to us last week, and we're working on that currently.
Hank, then Don.
Yeah, one final comment on this letter report. Oh, okay. In that same paragraph under the BDCP, the second paragraph and the end of that first sentence talks about in a way that will also provide for the protection and restoration of water supplies. That's the first time I've seen that. You know, I've seen restoration of the habitat the first time.
Which page are you talking about, Hank?
Page 7.
Okay.
About 40% down, paragraph beginning with this plan when completed in the fall of 2013. Provide for the protection and restoration of water supplies. Could you paraphrase restoration of water supplies, what that means?
I will try and do that. The intent of BDCP was to allow exports to rise again, kind of the history of the projects. I'm sorry, this will take 2 minutes. The history of the projects was, on average, to export up through the year 2000 around 5 million acre-feet per year. As part of CalFed, they actually increased the level of exports, and so you could actually assume the level of exports might be close to 6 million. I'm using really gross average terms. Over the last 4 or 5 years, that level has decreased. Now it's somewhere around 5, maybe slightly below 5 million acre-feet a year because of the restrictions that were imposed under the Endangered Species Act. So we went up during a period from 2000 to 2006, and now they've dropped back down in. The goal of BDCP was to make enough environmental improvements so that the species would recover, so that you could then say, well, we can increase exports back to where they were, so that we've improved reliability of the projects at the same time as we've protected the species. And that's the challenge they've set themselves. And right now, if you looked at the proposed project they released, it increases water exports back up to a level of around 5.9 million acre-feet. Now, BDCP, upon release, acknowledged that the plan as it currently is laid out doesn't meet the standards of protecting all the species under NCCP, so they are likely to have to make further changes, which probably mean less water than that 5.9. Their hope still is, though, that they end up increasing water supply under BDCP maybe to 5.7 million acre-feet a year, or 5.5. We don't know the final number, and that's what the whole purpose of doing all of this analysis on the effects analysis is.
Is there a target date for that? I mean, presumably you have to improve the habitat, and that may have a restriction in the export of water.
Yes.
After the habitat is restored to a certain extent, then you could increase the shipments.
So what it is a 50-year plan. I think the assumption is that it will take probably till 2025 to actually get the facilities built and in place. In the meantime, you're doing some incremental improvements to habitat restoration. That is not something that you can just automatically flip a switch and even do in 10 years. This takes a long time. There are long lead times for doing these things, especially for doing them right. And we haven't done any large-scale restoration in the Delta really ever. And so we need to do some small-scale projects, measure the effects, monitor those, and figure out how to do it right. So the challenge is, how do you put together a program that builds immense new facilities, that allows you to export this water, particularly after the facilities are built, when, as I mentioned earlier, the climate change really begins to kick in. So how do you do that at the same time as you're restoring the habitat so that you can protect, and it's about 60 species, I think, that they're trying to protect, the key ones being the aquatic species, the fish.
I should probably just observe that this is one of the deeply contentious issues in BDCP, because critics of BDCP have argued that you have predetermined that more water will be exported from the Delta, or maybe it's the same amount, and therefore that is not a fair balance. There was some of that in the hearing the other day. And in my personal opinion is, behind all the science and all the engineering and all the complications, everybody wants legal guarantees that what they're interested in will occur almost without regard to anything else. I don't see how that is possible, but that's the way we talk in America about government policy. Guarantee me this will happen and it's over with. Don, you had a question, I think, of Dr. Goodwin.
Yeah, just Dr. Goodwin. As Joe pointed out, though, if some of the appendices on the effects analysis haven't even been released yet, and the charge is to basically a month from tomorrow to have the panel review and then comment on. I mean, you said it presents a challenge, but if you don't even have the information available for review, how is it you can accomplish that? I guess you can't. Maybe you can't. I don't know, that's my question.
No, well, actually, with the effects panel, they're already working with the information they've got. And, of course, the time frame will depend on when they receive that information. So internally, we were having discussions about perhaps two levels, whether to go ahead with their meeting at the end of April, with perhaps the ability to follow up on other information, whether it would be worthwhile getting a quick read from the panel so there are no surprises, with a more detailed report later, or whether it should be postponed by a month. And I don't know, Joe, I don't think any decision's been made on that yet, has it? It really
Not
depends
to my
when we get
knowledge.
it.
Yeah. So, and some of this is, we have a panel of 7 scientists coming in from all over the country, and so you have to actually work with the panel who will be doing this independent review. It's not something that we can arbitrarily say, go do this. We need to work with them to figure out how they want to accomplish the objectives.
Well, I guess the reason I asked the question in part was that one of the calls from a number of different quarters has been to have independent, peer-reviewed information as the BCP comes forward. But giving time to the panel, whoever that is, to do that is important. Otherwise, you push on folks and they aren't able to do the, I think, the thorough review. Even with the best of people, time is a consideration there in having the information available. So, okay, well, it sounds like a pretty challenging charge for the panel.
No, and I think what you'll find is the panel will say that if they don't have the full amount of information, so the whole value of the review, they will be very clear about what they're commenting on and what they're not. But one of the things the science program has done is to you look at fallback dates with the panel, because we realize if you're going with national experts, they're very much in demand, and sure, their calendars are often booked out 12 months in advance. So we've anticipated that, and we do have a fallback deadline if necessary.
And you and Professor Norgaard are going to be double teaming us tomorrow morning on the Independent Science Board report on this subject?
Well, actually,
one hopes.
Yeah, I'll apologize for that. Now, I actually had a prior commitment tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So if there's a real pressing reason for me to be here, I will stay. If not, I will be flying out tonight. Okay. Here.
What I'm interested in, the Independent Science Board asked you, I think you said, to prepare kind of a work plan, outline, overview, scoping document, or something. Do you have any thoughts on what that's going to look like, not in detail, but just in concept as you approach it?
Yeah, actually, I think the way the Independent Science Board worded it, it was a charge. So what we imagine is it will look something like the National Academy review. So if you're familiar with that, I thought it would be a very concise, perhaps list of questions. Which
20 to 40 page overview, context, that one?
No, the charge itself will be a very clear statement of expectations and range, of what the review will include and what it will not.
Okay, and since we're doing this at the request of the Department of Interior, they are undoubtedly aware of all the problems that come for asking for fast turnaround time when not all the information that the Science Board is supposed to evaluate is available. What do they say about that other than, gosh, do the best you can? What does Interior say about that?
Well, actually, with Interior themselves, I'm not sure, Joe, if you've probably been, I'm so new, I've not been involved in those discussions directly.
I can tell you that we're getting mixed messages from the agencies. So we have some who are very anxious that we get as much done as fast as we can and we get it completed absolutely on schedule. Then we have other people from the agencies calling Lauren, who's the lead person on staff on this, saying, just delay it till you have everything. And our intent is to try and do what we can, but obviously to get the kind of quality work that is required for this to move forward, they have to have the documents in the appropriate amount of time, and that's just where it's at. I mean, that's why I am a skeptic about our ability as state and federal government to get an EIR, EIS out at the end of June. I think the reality is we will be doing incredibly well if we can actually make the decision that the Secretary of Interior and Governor have committed to about what the proposed project is around that time frame, and if they can get the document out in the fall even, I think that will be outstanding work. This is, as I say, this is the most controversial project in spite of high-speed rail. I think this is it stirs more emotion amongst people in the state than anything the state has ever done, and the technical issues involved are incredible, and to try and to assume that we can just push forward, it's a little naive.
Well, let me just draw back. The council needs at some point to get certainly a view from our consultants, Arcadis, and our own staff on what your review of whatever information is available might have to do with the Delta Plan and how we're writing it and so on. I understand it can't answer every question, but there will be in this material a lot of valuable information that is not probably noted yet in the fifth staff draft Delta Plan. There have to be new bodies of study that will be relevant. I'm kind of interested in, from Arcadis particularly, and Joe from our staff, kind of an overview paper. Look, here's what BDCP's done. There's an administrative draft, kind of a pre-administrative draft, or whatever it's called. There are the appendix out there, but here are the large things. They're talking about this proposal. They're talking about this proposal. It's the conceptual understanding that I think we need first, and then as we wait for the Independent Science Board to do what they are required to do and have agreed to do, we still need that conceptual understanding. We can't wait to have it explained to us at the end of the process.
So we had been planning to bring in a draft letter that goes from staff to staff saying, here are administrative draft comments.
Staff to staff. Which staff to which staff?
It would normally be signed by me. Frankly, normally it would not be a public letter, but after many discussions, and I talked to Mark Cowan about it, he has agreed this is a public letter. So what we will do is bring in the draft letter to the council. We'll bring an outline next month and talk that through. But what I'm hearing from you, Mr. Chair, goes beyond that. You would actually like a staff report that outlines the whole process and puts everything into context and lays out where we're at, what we've learned, and what.
I mean, as a public policy document, not as the vast technique that tells you how many feet down a tunnel would go or wouldn't go. I'm interested in how it relates to the Delta Plan and our obligation to produce a Delta Plan, and whether there is anything in the draft Delta Plan that needs to be changed. I suspect it's mostly textual changes as opposed to policies or recommendations, but I'm not positive about that. It's a huge amount of work, but we've got Arcadis to do it, and hopefully Arcadis will share information not just with us, but also with the Independent Science Board, so they don't have to duplicate things that need not be duplicated. And then I like the idea of treating these staff review comments almost as if they were responsible agency comments from the council in the BDC pre-process. We've done, 3 or 4 of those?
We have done those, and my expectation is when there is a formal draft on the table, there will be substantive comments that will come from the council formally. So the way the law reads, actually, the Independent Science Board sends its comments to us and to the Department of Fish and Game, and my assumption is that the council will then take those comments and use those as part of its submission to DWR and Resources Agency in the formal draft EIR process, review process.
Okay. All right. Catch your airplane, Dr. Goodwin. We'll talk to Professor Norgard about all the rest. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, Joe.
Yes, just a couple other things. One, the legislature last year asked us to work with the Department of Finance to review all of the programs and policies, or all of the programs of state agencies with regard to the Delta Plan. And we don't have a final Delta Plan. So what we ended up doing after working with the Department of Finance is reviewing their policies and programs. I'm sorry, I keep saying policies.
This is the zero-based budget?
Zero-based budget. We reviewed the 50 or so programs sponsored by state government to see how they would work with the existing draft Delta Plan. They were consistent in general. The plan is that we will be coming back next fall before the governor's budget is submitted to do a similar review after we've adopted the Delta Plan, so we can actually say this is how these things fit into the Delta Plan. I also brought something just to show you. We have something that we don't, in fact, I'm not sure that we've ever really talked about this at the council. Maybe we've talked about it for 2 or 3 minutes. This big book in front of me is actually a compilation, this year's report, of projects that are underway following on from CalFed. There's 485 projects underway. This tracks each and every one of those, shows where the money is coming from, where it's going to, where we are in the process for each of those projects. And we actually have that online under our program performance section on the website. And we very rarely talk about it, but I brought it just because I wanted to compliment staff and point out to you there's a lot of work going on that we don't often talk about. And there's a lot of money that's being spent implementing things that are, in fact, consistent with the direction that we've talked about in the Delta Plan. So on the order of $250, $300 million a year is being spent now on these kinds of programs and projects.
And I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think a copy of that is waiting each of you at the office. I could be wrong.
We didn't print copies for everybody.
Okay.
If you would like a copy, we'd be glad to give it to you. It is available on the web, and we will give it to you on a CD if you want. But my instinct was that not everybody would actually really want it. It would go on a shelf someplace and then 5 years from now be thrown in the trash.
Would you make sure that Mr. Johnston gets his copy?
No, I just want to visit Joe's.
Okay. Thank you. Last item, Mr. Grindstaff, although we've been talking about it.
Yeah, we've talked some about BDCP, and I think I've probably covered enough, and we got direction from you there. The last thing I want to do is I want to apologize for last month at our last meeting, during the day when it looked like we were going to complete the meeting in one day. I actually asked staff to contact Mr. Nordhoff and let him know that we would not have a meeting on Friday. Well, it turned out we didn't get everything in one day, and we didn't follow up to let him know that we were meeting. So he wasn't here through no fault of his own. It was my fault for not following up. So
my feelings were really hurt when I read the minutes of the meeting that was canceled last night.
Would you like today's meeting minutes to note that your feelings were hurt from? Okay. All right. Thank you very much.